Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of this podcast series, Robotics Programs in Elementary Schools. In the previous episodes, we have talked about skills learned in robotics, as well as robotics programs, what they are, and how to run them. This is going to be the final episode to close out this podcast to help educators learn more about running robotics programs in hopes that they want to start their own after-school robotics program at their elementary school or district. This episode will focus on the other side of the conversation. Should we be really running robotics programs for elementary students who might be too young? To help us answer this question, let me introduce our guests for this episode. Joining me today, for the first time, we have multiple people. They are all right here at our recording space at Los Altos High School. Please welcome our three wonderful students currently enrolled in the robotics program here, Yanai, Zoe, and Arden. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Pretty good?
I'm excited to answer these questions.
Before we get started, kind of just tell the viewers your first name, your current grade level, and what you do on the robotics program here.
Okay, I'm Zoe. I'm in 11th grade, and on this program, I'm primarily a mechanical designer. I do computer-aided design.
I'm Arden. I'm a sophomore in 10th grade, and I work in the electrical field and assembly.
Yeah, and I'm Yanai. I'm in 12th grade, and I am a designer, and I like to dabble. So.
Yeah, and you were also the captain this year.
Yes.
And Zoe, you're going to be a captain next year as well. Okay, awesome. And have any of you done robotics prior to being here in the Los Altos program?
Yeah, I had some experience in summer camps, and I also did some in middle school.
Yeah, I did like a lot of different robotics programs. I did FLL Junior when I was in 3rd to 4th grade. I did FLL from 5th to 8th grade. And I did VEX and MATE in 9th grade. So.
Yeah, and similarly to Zoe, I also did FLL First Lego League in 6th grade, I think, 6th and 7th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's awesome. And all these programs you mentioned, that was mentioned on a previous episode. So if you have not checked out episode 2, which we talk about robotics programs and current ones and available ones, then I highly recommend watching that one before you watch this one. Anyways, I hope you guys are excited to have this conversation today. I just really wanted to have a student's perspective on this episode instead of another adult to really get different perspectives on the situation of what people might think. So yeah, let's just go ahead and begin. I was doing some research prior to this episode while kind of making these podcasts, and a lot of them actually say that robotics in general, kind of like the topic, might be actually too complicated for some young students. The hobby or activity should be done at a much older age, more middle school or high schooler. And the reason why I'm just going to give you this vague answer is I just want to hear your first thoughts.
Well, I think it's no secret that robotics is definitely a complex topic. And all of us have had some experience when we were younger doing robotics. So I think there's ways to make robotics accessible, and it's like you don't always dive straight into the deep end. Specifically, like I can speak from my own experience when I came onto the team. I had no knowledge at all, and a lot of the things that we're learning on our team are things that they told us we're too old to learn, or too young to learn. So things like SolidWorks and using big tools like CNC machines, mills, all that kind of stuff. I definitely don't think that robotics, there's nobody too young to be doing robotics. Obviously, there's some dangers involved, but there's always ways to make it accessible for younger kids.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Accessibility is something huge that teachers learn. And it's not even just robotics, that accessibility is something that teachers will help students, become available in terms of certain topics. There has been studies showing that no matter the age, students always have the ability to learn something new, as long as you get to find the opportunity of how to teach them these new topics.
Yeah,
well,
I just want to add on to that just to say that, I think in the future, robotics is going to become a bigger part of our everyday life. So being well-versed, maybe not even just how to build robots, but learn more about robots is really helpful to me.
What are your guys' thoughts on that first kind of statement about robotics being too complicated for children?
Okay, I feel like since I did Lego robotics when I was in elementary school, at the end of my FLL career, at the end of middle school, I felt like I still didn't know like anything about robotics because I felt like they had simplified it too much for me. But at the same time, I can totally see that we shouldn't be putting elementary schoolers on like power tools and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely like complicated and unbalanced. I feel like though we tend to underestimate young children.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally believe that you could probably start at any age, but the reasonable part is not actually having like a very young kid, like, you know, operating heavy machinery
Yeah.
and not being able to have access without like proper experience. But I believe you could probably start learning a decent bit of the basics when you're at a young age, and I think that's pretty reasonable to
Yeah.
do so if you have an interest in that.
I had just a quick question for you, Aiden. Like,
Yeah.
When you say like robotics, like, are you? Because it sounds like you guys are mentioning like heavy machinery.
Correct.
But when you talk about robotics, what exactly do you mean?
It's funny that you mentioned that because later we're going to talk about that. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I love that you're thinking that way because an example I want to kind of take is science, right? When young kids learn about science, they're not out there doing their own experiments, you know, whether it be something where it's just observational experience. You know, at a very young age, when you learn about science, you just learn about the life cycle of a plant. That's kind of like the basic of science. So when we consider robotics, it can mean very, very many different things, and so many different skills are learned in the robotics. In the first episode, I talked about the term educational robotics with Douglas. You guys all know Douglas. He was in the first episode, and he's also a teacher mentor for these students. And educational robotics was kind of defined by a man named Angel Fernandez. He wrote a case study on robotics in 2018, and he kind of defined about educational robotics is robotics, and it's not only about the skills, STEM skills of building the robot, but it's also about the skills of getting to the robot, of how to getting to the robot. So as many of you know, you guys learned so many skills in the robotics team, communication being one of them. But when we talk about art, and you'd mentioned like students getting on heavy machinery, yes, that is part of robotics because you need to build parts. But that is when we get into higher levels of robotics. Robotics can be as simple as a student learning how to problem solve. For example, the robot is not driving forward. Could that be something where it's the robot itself is the issue, or is there code an issue? Or even younger levels, like first graders wanting to build a tower made out of popsicle sticks and hot glue, as mentioned in an exercise by Stephen Hine, your guys' robotics teacher, about how, the tower is tipping over. How can a first grader problem solve to make this tower stand on its own? So these skills can be learned in a robotics program, similar how in science, a very base level is learning about the life cycle of a tree, comparative to high levels in high school where they're making their own science experiments and things like that and presenting at a science fair. So again, Art, I agree with you. Maybe we shouldn't be putting first graders on a CNC machine like I mentioned, but in terms of just building basic motor skills and things like problem solving is something that robotics programs can teach that students might not get in a normal traditional classroom. Which is kind of what I'm going to get into was, again, according to some sources, which I'll put on screen, 8 years old is too young, and we should be waiting until after 8 years old, or 8 and younger is too young. And this is through that they think that they don't have the cognitive development yet for robotics. But again, robotics is super vague because, as you guys mentioned, as you and I brought up, it can mean a multitude of things of what you learn in a robotics program. So yeah, let me hear some thoughts on kind of like that situation in general. Do you guys think that there are ways where robotics program, again, is accessibly different in terms of other programs that can help students learn these kind of skills that you've learned in robotics? Are there any things that you've learned in robotics in your elementary program that you still bring with you today? Just let me know. What do you guys think?
I can touch on that if you guys don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like thinking.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would definitely say that like robotics it is such a vague field, and it's kind of hard to put any one definition on like what is robotics. So when we say like maybe you don't feel as prepared when you're coming into this program, I don't think that's by virtue of like the robotics programs that we were in prior to this weren't like sufficient. It's just because like it's such a broad field that there's so many different like avenues that you can go down and things like that. So I would say that one of the biggest things that I was able to take from FLL was like iteration, being able to like prototype things, working. Like robotics is like one of the reasons I think it's so hard to define is because it's so interdisciplinary. It's like the intersection between like mechanical, electrical, code, and it's kind of in this weird gray area.
Yeah.
So like being able to like be introduced to some of those different fields through FLL. So like we were doing like, I think it was just block coding. You were literally
Yes.
just drag and drop
Yes.
blocks and things like that into the code, and then like putting together Legos, and then like a little bit of wiring up the robot. You had to like plug in all the different motors.
Mm-hmm.
So just being introduced and like being exposed to like a discipline where you're connecting different technical skills was super valuable, because you can then take that and, for example, for me, freshman year I actually wasn't even in robotics. I was taking a design class, and having the experience of being able to connect all those things was super helpful, because we're working with Arduinos and we're working with laser cutters and we're working with I don't know, like again, we were doing assembly and things like that. But all of that is just sort of like, you have to start small. So starting with Legos is totally sufficient, and then you can sort of build up your skills. So I think, yeah, definitely there were skills that I learned in those early classes that carried over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you guys have any thoughts?
So from my personal experience in my childhood, my dad bought me like a soldering kit a while ago when I was younger, like around 9 years old. So I was doing stuff like that with my dad. He was helping me out with soldering. It was like fun projects to do with my dad. And I believe that you could probably start off with something pretty sophisticated. I would say soldering isn't probably the easiest to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff involved with that. But it's pretty much, I would say it's more up to like how the parents would feel about like if they're comfortable with their kid using something like a soldering iron versus Legos.
Yeah.
So that could also probably be a major reason why a kid would start off doing something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like two things around like what we've been talking about just now. I feel like in terms of what I was saying, in that like we tend to underestimate small children, and like the researchers or whoever saying that like 8-year-olds might not have the cognitive capacity for like robotics or whatever. This is just like a random example, but I feel like last year when I was in chem and I was learning about molecular geometry,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know, this would be super intuitive to me right now if I learned it in like 5th grade.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, I feel like it's definitely good to like start small, as you know, I was saying, like, and I do think I learned skills in FLL
Mm-hmm.
that carry over. Some of them were like, yeah, like the principle of problem solving, which I think comes a lot from like how you teach robotics, in addition to the fact that it's robotics. And also some technical things, like how literally a robot will take your instructions. Like if you tell it to drive into a wall and it doesn't complete the rotations, it stops and it never moves again.
Yeah.
I think... Wait, I forgot what the original question was.
It's fine. No, just keep it on. Yeah. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, again, I personally would have appreciated a perhaps robotics experience that I thought was closer to real life robotics conditions, but I think there is definitely value in the experience for kids, like even with simplified robotics programs like Lego, learning how things move when you tell things to move.
Yeah.
Learning the basic principles of things like gears and stuff, or just like trying to figure out what's going on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to start just really quickly to
Yeah.
add on to that. You'd mentioned
No, for sure.
like, molecular
Molecular geometry.
geometry. Yeah. I've never heard of that, but yes, like I would definitely say that like as a CAD person, we use like a lot of the things that we learn in other classes, like physics, math, all those things kind of connect into robotics. So if you start with the basics, something really simple, it definitely at some point will carry over.
And this last topic I really want to talk about as we wrap up this episode is, you guys always mention about stuff you learn in robotics and carrying it over, whether it be something similar to molecular geometry or even just problem solving and things like that. In my child adolescence development class of literature, it is always mentioned that it is easier for a child to learn a language no matter how young they are, starting from week 0, from 1-year-old, 2-year-old. The younger you are, I don't know if you guys have probably heard this before, the younger you are, the easier it is to learn and develop another language apart from your original language. So it kind of goes similar to any other topic. A lot of people might think that, skills they learn in robotics at a super young age, they're just going to forget it because they're not going to apply it. But when we talk about applications of fine motor skills and problem solving, you do apply that. So I feel like it's really important for these robotics programs to kind of, let children know that, hey, just because they're young and they might be forgetful, there are skills that they'll learn that they'll remember to use in school or, when they're out with their parents and just kind of problem solving or whatever skills they might learn. So I'm just kind of thinking, what do you guys just think upon that as our kind of final topic to talk about?
Sorry, I don't mean to take too much.
No, keep going. Yeah, no.
But I am trilingual, so I definitely can relate to what you're saying. I haven't taken classes on any of the languages that I know for probably close to a decade. And I still know how to speak to my parents in 3 languages.
Yeah.
So, I definitely think that learning young is really, really helpful. Like, I don't know. I can speak to it on the fact that, like, learning those skills is definitely helpful as we evolve kind of as a society. I don't want to, like, bring up AI, but, like,
yeah.
But I don't know, like, I think the world is changing a lot, and having the skills to be able to solve a problem is helpful in whatever you do in your life. If you end up pursuing engineering, robotics, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're always going to be encountering problems, whether it's in your own life, in your professional life, whatever it is. Having those skills and having, like, the ability to connect disciplines is super duper duper valuable. And yeah, I think that there's no age that's too early to start learning those skills.
Yeah, I feel like. Okay, I also don't want to bring like other things into this.
No, keep going. No, don't bring whatever you think.
Like debate when I was in freshman year, an argument that I probably brought up like every other debate was children are impressionable and they will remember everything you say, and everything in your life is kind of influenced a lot by what happened when you were a child. Though I think robotics isn't exactly learning a language. I will say for learning a language, practicing as you continue in your life is important. So I imagine for robotics it's similar. Like if I wasn't doing robotics right now, I probably wouldn't remember exactly like a whole ton of the technical skills from like when I was in middle and elementary school. Though I guess there's definitely a distinction between like procedural knowledge and like technical knowledge, where I think like it's pretty hard to forget like the procedures of problem solving as when you're in elementary school. Like I speak Chinese. I don't really speak it to my parents, but they speak it to me. And I haven't taken classes in a few years, so I am forgetting vocabulary at an alarming pace. But I've never forgotten like how to get into the mindset of speaking Chinese, right? So I think that's kind of
Any last thoughts, Arden?
Yeah, I really agree with starting young. I personally know another language. I know Russian. I've known it for like a while. It's like my first language. English is technically my second language. I started also like learning a lot of stuff at a young age because my dad really wanted me to get interested in computer stuff. He started explaining a lot of knowledge about electrical components. He taught me a lot about computers, and I think I probably hold a lot of knowledge today, and it makes things a lot more. It makes things a lot easier to understand. And I think it's really important to know things at a young age.
Yeah, and like also adding on to that, like knowing a language is super helpful because it makes you more versatile. And I think robotics is the same way. If you have the skills to be able to problem solve or build a robot, whatever it is, those skills make you see kind of the world in almost like a different way. And so like it kind of works the same with a language. Like whenever I go visit my grandparents, for example, I'm able to communicate with them. So you kind of learn this like language of like engineering, or, like problem solving, whatever it is. So definitely very, very, very helpful.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I just wanted to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is also not completely related to the original thing, but just as you know, I was saying, you were talking about like how engineering gives you a different way to see the world. Since I've started getting more confident in robotics, I keep looking at things and being like, I could totally make that. And I think this is a level of confidence and whimsy that I think is great to bring to the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And that can come with any learnings, right? Of, hey, I recognize this in the world, then I've learned about it. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. Zoe, Arden, and I, again, wonderful takes. And I hopefully that this episode kind of reflects upon teachers wanting to get into a robotics program and making one and realizing just because they're young doesn't mean they can't do it. So that's going to wrap up this episode, as well as the podcast series. And I hope you guys really do enjoy, and I hope you guys do try and convince your district or school to run an after-school robotics program. I'd like to thank the 3 students from Los Altos again for joining me on this episode. I would also like to thank Los Altos High School for letting me record here on their campus. I also like to give a big shout out to Douglas McClure for letting me use his recording equipment to record these episodes. And yeah, so I want to give a big thank you for listening to this podcast, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.
Shout out Aiden.